You ever feel like your mind is just constantly under siege? Well, what if it's more than just a feeling of being influenced? What if our thoughts, our beliefs, even our moral reflexes are being actively recruited or conscripted by systems we don't even see? Well, this explainer is all about that fight, the fight for the sovereignty of your own self.
I mean, seriously, are they? It's a fundamental question, right? But the answer is way more complicated than it's ever been. Because before you can even begin to answer that, you have to understand the forces that are at play, all working behind the scenes to shape your reality for you. So let's dive right into this really powerful idea, cognitive conscription. The basic concept here is that we're not just being marketed to anymore. It's way past that. We're actually being drafted into ways of thinking and feeling, often without our consent or even our awareness. What we're talking about here is a total environment. It's these architectures of persuasion that are built right into our platforms, our social circles, and even the stories we tell each other. Your attention, your identity, what makes you angry, what makes you feel like a good person, all of these things are being cultivated by outside forces.
And all this leads us to a new way of understanding the problem, something called conscripted bias theory. And trust me, it's going to completely reframe how you think about something we all assume we get, our own biases.
Okay, this is the crucial shift in perspective. The old idea is that bias is a personal defect, something that's wrong with us. But conscripted bias theory flips that completely on its head. It argues that your biases aren't something you have, they're something you're recruited into. They are inherited, not chosen. So who are these recruiting agents? Well, they're pretty much all around us. Think about the algorithmic engines that decide every single thing you see online, or the mimetic tribes that give you social points for thinking a certain way. These systems basically conscript our reflexes and then package them back to us as if they're our own authentic moral judgments.
So here's the really important part. When your bias is conscripted, it stops serving you. It becomes performative, just a way to signal that you belong to the right group. It becomes predictable, which of course makes it incredibly easy to monetize. And at the end of the day, it becomes exploitable by these systems of capture.
Okay, so if we're all being conscripted, how in the world do we even start to push back? Well, the first step isn't about finding a new belief system to jump into. It's about learning a completely new way of seeing. The source calls this tool Hyper-Nihility. And before you get turned off by the name, just hang on, it's not what you think. This isn't about despair, it's about survival. Hyper-Nihility is basically the mental stance you take when you realize the usual consensus and the typical moral appeals just can't protect you anymore. It's the ability to look at any story, any online outrage, any narrative, and see the machinery that's working behind it. It's an adaptive gaze for a very, very confusing world. And this gaze, it's a practice. It starts by asking a series of really sharp questions about anything you come across. The first one is foundational. What scaffolds does this rest on? What are the hidden, unstated assumptions that are required to hold this idea up in the first place? Next up, you asked the classic question of power. Who benefits from its circulation? Who's gaining status, or money, or influence when this story or idea spreads like wildfire? If you follow the benefit, you can start to understand the architecture of capture. Then you gotta think ahead. These narratives are never static, they're always evolving. So you ask yourself, what does the next iteration of this idea look like? When you try to predict its next form, you start to see the underlying pattern, not just the argument of the day. And finally, maybe the most important question of all, what is this trying to obscure? What uncomfortable reality, what emerging pattern is this entire narrative perfectly designed to hide from you or distract you from? And here's the payoff. When you start practicing this gaze, you stop getting trapped in the day-to-day arguments. You start seeing the entire life cycle of ideologies, where they come from, how they get to be dominant, how they start to decay, and what's waiting in the wings to take their place. But, seeing the architecture isn't enough. Once you've stripped away all the illusions, you need a new place to stand, a new foundation. And this is where the concept of sanity comes in, not as a medical term, but as a new moral baseline. So this brings us to a really clear choice between two different approaches. On one side, you've got performative morality. Its only goal is applause and belonging. Its method is a gamified reflex, and the end result is always ideological capture. But on the other side, you have sanity-based ethics. Here, the goal is internal coherence. The method is stable pattern recognition, and the results, true sovereignty of the self. So, okay, we've got the diagnosis, we've got the gaze, and we have the new foundation.
But how do you maintain this in practice? How do you stop yourself from slowly getting recaptured? Well, you need a system, a model for self-governance. The problem is that this capture isn't just coming from one place. It's multi-nodal. It's not one single algorithm or one bad ideology. It's all of them working together, each one reinforcing the others in this complex, almost inescapable web. And this is what that cycle looks like. It starts with your data, which is then used to capture your attention. Your attention is then used to shape your identity. That identity capture makes your emotions predictable and super easy to manipulate. And that emotional capture then drives your behavior, which generates more data, and the cycle starts all over again, even stronger than before. So the proposed countermeasure is this concept called SanityCheck.Blockchain. Now, to be super clear, this isn't about crypto. It's a powerful metaphor. The idea is to create a personal, private ledger of your own mind, an unchangeable record of your thoughts and decisions that you can look back on to see if and how you've been manipulated. This is why this concept is so incredibly vital. As Charles Kim puts it, ownership of one's data becomes the last battle, because your data, it isn't just information, it's your biography. It's the externally stored story of who you are. To lose control of it is to lose control of your own story. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway here. Conscripted bias theory shows us how we're recruited. Hyper-Nihility gives us the vision to see the systems, and a Sanity-based ledger gives us a model for governing ourselves. At the end of the day, it all comes down to the fight for the self. And this might be the most important redefinition of all. Sanity isn't just the absence of crazy. It is the active, deliberate, and difficult practice of maintaining a self. It is the presence of your own sovereign mind in a world that just wants to rent it out. So we'll end with this question for you. The source uses the term menticide, the erosion of the mind's capacity to think for itself. When that has become a literal business model, the most urgent task any of us have is to figure out how we're going to protect our own selfhood. What will your ledger look like?